My phone vibrated on the counter, shattering the morning's quiet. It was my son, the pilot. "Mom!" Leo's voice was a tight wire of confusion. "Something really strange is going on. My sister-in-law is at the house right now." I glanced toward the staircase, hearing the familiar creak of the floorboards from above. "Of course she is, sweetheart," I replied, a soft laugh in my voice. "Sloane is right here. She's getting ready for her day." His next words were a whisper, cold and sharp against my ear. "That's impossible, Mom. I have her passport in my hand. She just boarded my flight to Milan, and in that very second, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. If you've ever felt that icy shock of betrayal, that moment when the world you know cracks open, then you understand why I'm sharing this. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of secrets uncovered and strength rediscovered, subscribe to this channel and stay with me. You're not alone in this. This morning had begun like any other. The California sun poured through the big kitchen window, painting the tile floor in warm stripes. The scent of coffee and toast hung in the air. My oldest son, David, had left for his construction site before dawn, the rumble of his truck a familiar goodbye. My grandson, Jake, that bright-eyed 8-year-old, had scampered off to the school bus, his backpack bouncing. And Sloane, my daughter-in-law, David's wife, had just gone upstairs. Her voice, usually so light and melodic, had floated down to me. "Just going to freshen up, Mom." I'd nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. I was loading the last plate into the dishwasher when the landline rang. I dried my hands, a little smile on my face as I picked up. It was Leo, my younger son. His voice, always so full of energy, felt like a burst of sunshine. "Hey, Mom, just had a layover. Wanted to hear your voice." Leo was my adventurer, a co-pilot living his dream of touching the clouds. We chatted for a minute about his flight, about the weather, his laughter easy. But then a pause, a shift in the atmosphere, even over the phone. "Mom," he said, his tone now cautious, edged with disbelief. "Something really weird just happened. My sister-in-law is at the house," I chuckled. "Leo, of course she is. Sloane is upstairs. I just spoke to her." I could still hear the faint sound of water running through the pipes, a normal, domestic sound. The silence on his end was heavy, filled only with the faint hum of a distant airport terminal. When he spoke again, his voice was low, deliberate. "Mom, that can't be. I have her passport right here. I'm looking at it. Sloane Marie Henderson. She just boarded my flight to Milan. She's in seat 2A. A cold trickle, like a single drop of ice water, traced a path down my spine. I tried to laugh it off, my grip tightening on the receiver. "Honey, you must be mistaken. You're tired. It's a long flight. I just saw her." "I'm not mistaken," he insisted, his voice gaining a firmness that brooked no argument. He explained how after final boarding he dashed back to the gate to retrieve a forgotten flight plan. A passport had been lying on the floor near the jet bridge. He'd picked it up intending to hand it to ground crew, but habit made him flip it open. The photo, the name. It was Sloane. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping again. "I just walked through first class to be sure. She's there. She's sitting next to a man in a suit that probably costs more than my car." They were talking, their heads close together. They looked intimate. His words were a physical blow. A couple. The water upstairs shut off. The silence that followed was somehow louder, more menacing. I heard the bathroom door open, and then her voice, clear and close, called down. "Mom, everything okay?" I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It's just Leo," I called back, my voice strangled. I hurried into the living room, away from the staircase, turning my back as if she could see the panic on my face through the walls. I cupped my hand around the phone. "Leo, I just heard her. She's here. She just got out of the shower. Mom." Leo's voice was flat, final. "It's impossible. I am looking at her 30 feet away from me. The plane is pushing back from the gate." The world tilted. I mumbled something, I don't know what, and hung up the phone. My hands were trembling so violently I had to clutch them together. The cozy living room with its framed family photos and the well-worn sofa suddenly felt like a stage set, a beautiful, detailed lie. If Sloane was here, who was the woman on Leo's flight? And if the woman on the flight was Sloane, who, in God's name, was in my house? A few minutes later, Sloane came down. She was wearing a simple cream-colored linen dress, her hair damp and dark around her shoulders. She smiled, that same gentle, placid smile I knew so well. "Mom, I'm heading to the farmer's market a little early. Do you need anything? Those heirloom tomatoes you like?" I looked at her, trying to see a ghost, an imposter. But she was solid. She was real. Her voice was hers. Her face was hers. Some tomatoes would be lovely, dear," I managed, my throat sandpaper dry. She nodded, picked up her woven market bag, and walked out. I stood at the window watching her go, my soul a churning vortex of confusion. I didn't believe Leo was lying. My son had no reason to invent such a horrifying story. He was pragmatic, honest to a fault. But Sloane, the woman I had lived with for nearly a decade, the mother of my grandson. She was also undeniably here. I sank onto the sofa, the bright sun outside feeling like an accusation. "My name is Cassandra Jones. I'm a 67-year-old widow who has found a quiet rhythm in the suburbs of Sacramento. My husband, Michael, passed 8 years ago, leaving me with my 2 boys, the anchors of my life. David, the oldest, is a contractor. His hands always slightly calloused, his mind always on his next project. Leo, the youngest, is my sky gazer, the one who always dreamed of flight. My world had shrunk beautifully to this house, to David's small family, Sloane and Jake, and to the peaceful cadence of our days. Sloane had always been the picture of grace. She was elegant, capable, the kind of woman who made homemaking seem like an art form. I remembered their wedding, a lovely, heartfelt ceremony in a rose garden. She had come into our family with a quiet confidence, seamlessly becoming a wonderful wife to David and a devoted mother to Jake. I had often counted my blessings, thinking how lucky we were. But now Leo's call forced me to re-examine the tapestry of our lives, to look at the loose threads I had deliberately ignored. There were days Sloane was effusively affectionate, hugging Jake, humming as she cooked, her laughter light and frequent. And then there were days she was distant, sharp, her patience a thin veneer. I'd attributed it to stress, to the natural ebb and flow of mood. Now those ebbs and flows felt suspect. A memory, sharp and clear, cut through my panic. A few months back, I'd seen Sloane sign for a package at the door with her left hand, her signature a messy, looping scrawl. It was odd. She was so decidedly right-handed. I'd asked her about it later. "Since when are you a lefty?" She'd laughed a little too quickly. "Oh, just trying to keep my brain sharp, Mom. They say using your non-dominant hand is good for you." I'd accepted it, filed it away as a quirk. Now it felt like a clue. The front door burst open, and Jake ran in, his small face flushed with excitement. "Grandma, I got a gold star on my spelling test." He threw his arms around my waist, and I held him tight, breathing in the little boy's smell of sunshine and pencil shavings. He pulled out his folder to show me. "Look, see, Mom helped me study last night. Her writing is so pretty." He pointed to a neatly written list of words in the margin. Then he flipped the page. "But this morning she wrote my note for lunch, and it's all wobbly." He showed me another note, the same words, but scritched and slanted, written with a different hand. My blood ran cold. She was probably in a hurry, honey," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Jake looked up at me, his eyes wide and earnest. "She's different sometimes, Grandma. Some days she reads me 2 stories and sings the song about the moon. Other days, she just says, 'Good night,' and closes the door." His innocent observation was another piece of the puzzle, and it felt like a piece of my heart breaking off. The doorbell rang. It was my neighbor Brenda holding a pie dish. "Cassandra, returned your dish. Sloane brought over that delicious peach cobbler last night." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You know, it was so odd. She handed it to me with her left hand. I could have sworn she was right-handed. Isn't that funny?" I forced a smile, my face feeling like a brittle mask. "Oh, you know the young people, Brenda. Always multitasking." I invited her in for tea, my mind racing. It wasn't just me. The differences were visible, tangible. After Brenda left, I retreated to the backyard, the watering can heavy in my hand. I tended to my roses, the ritual usually a comfort. But today, the thorns seemed sharper, the blooms too bright. The words of my son, my grandson, my neighbor, they circled in my head like vultures. Was I going crazy, or had I been willfully blind, clinging to a peaceful illusion? Sloane returned from the market, her bag full of produce, but she was carrying it in her left hand, the strap slung over her left shoulder. I remembered, with photographic clarity, that she always carried weight on her right. "Find everything, dear?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "I did," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm going to make that roasted chicken you love for dinner." Her voice was the same, but the cadence was slightly off, a half beat too fast. I nodded and turned away, my hands trembling as I pretended to organize the mail. The evidence was mounting, a silent, terrifying crescendo. Dinner that night was a strained affair. David was tired but cheerful, asking Jake about his day. Sloane was quiet, eating with a detached precision. "Don't forget David," she said, her tone practical, almost cool. "The contractor for the Johnson job is meeting you at 7 sharp tomorrow morning." I looked at her, at the familiar curve of her cheek, and heard Leo's voice. She's sitting next to a man. They looked like a couple. The food turned to ash in my mouth. A few days later, the tension snapped. Jake, reaching for the milk, knocked over his glass. Water spread across the table like a shockwave. I moved quickly with a towel. "It's okay, sweetheart. Accidents happen." But Sloane, from across the table, slammed her hand down. "Jake, for heaven's sake, watch what you're doing. You're not a baby anymore." Her voice was a whip crack, harsh and alien. The table went silent. David stared at her. "Sloane, it was an accident. Relax." Her eyes flashed with a venom I had never seen. "You always coddle him. You never support me when I'm trying to teach him discipline." The air grew sick and heavy. Jake's lower lip trembled. I pulled him onto my lap, my heart aching. This was not the woman who had, just days prior, patiently helped him build a model airplane. That night, after the kitchen was clean and the house was quiet, I did something I never imagined I would do. I took an old leather-bound journal from my nightstand. My hand shook as I wrote the first entry. 15 p.m. Sloane leaves for market. Wearing beige pants, hair down, carries bag on left shoulder. Voice bright, take copy, and Sloane returns. Wearing blue jeans, hair in a ponytail, bag on right shoulder. Voice clipped, distant. I was documenting my own daughter-in-law. Each word felt like a betrayal, but the greater betrayal I feared was already happening to us. The small, satisfying turn came sooner than I expected, about a week into my silent investigation. Sloane announced she was going to a yoga class, something she did every Wednesday. She left in her usual leggings and jacket, but a few minutes later, driven by a compulsion I couldn't name, I went to her bathroom under the guise of looking for a cleaning spray. There, in the wastebasket, was a crumpled receipt. I smoothed it out. It wasn't from a yoga studio. It was from the Oasis Day Spa, dated today, but the timestamp was for a couple's massage package, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. It was now 4:30 p.m., and the receipt total was a staggering $475. I committed the details to memory. Transaction: 88241, the Oasis Day Spa. A couple's massage. David was at work. Leo was in the air. My blood ran cold, but a strange, cold clarity settled over me. This was my first piece of concrete proof. I had something. I took a picture of the receipt with my phone and left it exactly as I found it. I needed to talk to someone. I called my oldest friend, Marguerite. We met at a quiet cafe, and over steaming cups of chamomile tea, the whole story tumbled out. Leo's call, the passport, the changing handwriting, the receipt. I showed her the pictures in my journal. Marguerite listened, her wise eyes growing wider with each revelation. "Cassandra, this is not in your head," she said firmly, gripping my hand. These are not coincidences. You have to find out what is happening. For David, for Jake. But what if I'm wrong? What if I destroy my family over a misunderstanding? And what if you're right? She countered, her voice soft but intense. What if you let this deception continue and it destroys them from the inside out? Trust your gut, Cass. It's screaming for a reason. Bolstered by her belief, I became more vigilant. I noted every discrepancy, every shift in demeanor. The puzzle was coming together, but the picture it formed was monstrous. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Sloane left the house saying she was meeting a friend for lunch. Something in her evasive look told me this was different. I didn't think. I just acted. I grabbed my keys and followed her. She didn't drive toward any of her usual lunch spots. She drove downtown to a part of the city with sleek, modern apartment buildings. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched her pull into the underground parking garage of a place called the Meridian Towers. She used a key card to enter. She didn't just visit someone here. She had access. I sat in my car, parked a block away, my hands clenched on the steering wheel. This was it. This was the secret life. I waited for an hour, feeling sick. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. A man was with her, tall, dressed in expensive casual wear, his hair perfectly styled. He kissed her, not a goodbye kiss, but a lingering, familiar one, before getting into a silver sports car. Sloane got into her own car and drove away, a serene smile on her face. I had seen enough. I drove home, my mind a whirlwind of pain and fury. I had to know who she was in that other life. The next day, I went back to the Meridian Towers. I walked into the sleek lobby, my heart in my throat, and approached the concierge. "I'm here to see my daughter-in-law," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Sloane Henderson? I believe she's visiting a Mr. Oh dear, his name has just slipped my mind. Tall gentleman, silver car?" The young concierge, eager to help, smiled. "Oh, you must mean Mr. Thorne's guest. In 12B? Mr. Thorne just left, but I believe she's still upstairs." Mr. Thorne. The name meant nothing to me, but it was a start. A powerful, wealthy-sounding name. It fit the man I had seen. I thanked him and left, the name burning in my mind. Alistair Thorne. It had to be. The final piece fell into place through a moment of sheer, desperate inspiration. I remembered Sloane had an old locked jewelry box she'd brought from her childhood home. She'd once told me she'd lost the key. That afternoon, while she was out, I found it on the top shelf of her closet. With a trembling hand and a bobby pin, a skill my Michael had teasingly taught me decades ago, I jimmied the cheap lock. It clicked open. Inside, nestled against velvet, weren't just trinkets. There was a second driver's license. The photo was of Sloane, but the name was different. Serena Thorne. The address was for the Meridian Towers, 12B. And tucked beside it was a folded legal-looking document. It was a prenuptial agreement, dated just 3 months ago, between Alistair Thorne and Serena Thorne. My Sloane was planning to marry another man. The world swam before my eyes. The deception was so much deeper, so much more calculated than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just having an affair. She was building a second life, a second identity with one foot already out of our door. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I called Leo. "You need to come home this weekend, it's important." I called David and told him we were having a special family dinner, that it was crucial everyone be there. I needed them all in one room. The night of the dinner, the air in the house was charged with a tension I had created. I'd set the table with our best china, lit candles. I'd made David's favorite pot roast and Jake's beloved mashed potatoes. It felt like the Last Supper. David was confused, but pleased. "What's the occasion, Mom?" "I just wanted us all to be together," I said, my voice tight. Sloane was quiet, watchful, a faint line of tension between her brows. She knew something was off. When we were all seated, I took a deep breath. My heart was a wild drum, but my voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm. "There's something we need to talk about," I began. I looked at Sloane. All of us. I started from the beginning. Leo's call from the airplane. The passport. I saw David's face shift from confusion to disbelief. I talked about the changes I'd noticed, the handwriting, the moods. I mentioned the receipt from the Oasis Day Spa for a couples massage. Sloane's face was a pale, stony mask. "What is this, Mom?" David asked, his voice strained. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the woman sitting at this table," I said, my gaze fixed on Sloane, "has been living a double life." Then I played my final cards. I described following her to the Meridian Towers. I said the name Alistair Thorne. A small choked sound escaped Sloane's lips. Finally, I placed the jewelry box on the table. I opened it and laid the driver's license and the prenuptial agreement next to David's plate. The room was utterly silent. Jake looked from face to face, his little brow furrowed in fear. David picked up the license, his hand shaking. He read the name, Serena Thorne. He looked at his wife, his eyes wide with hurt and betrayal. "Sloane, what is this?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then the mask shattered. All the pretense of sweetness evaporated, replaced by a cold, defiant fury. "Fine," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "You want the truth? Yes, Alistair and I are getting married. He can give me the life I deserve. A life away from this suffocating little existence. Away from your constant hammering, David, and your mother's prying eyes." She glared at me. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Her words hung in the air, toxic and final. David looked as if he'd been gutted. Jake started to cry, soft, confused sobs. "You're my mom," he whimpered. "Not for much longer," she said, the words so cruel they didn't seem real. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm done. I don't want custody. I don't want anything from this life." She walked out of the dining room, and a moment later we heard the front door slam. The sound echoed in the profound silence she left behind. Our family, as I knew it, was over. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain. David was a ghost of himself, moving through the house in a daze of grief and anger. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal in their simplicity. Sloane, or Serena, wanted nothing. She signed the papers without a backward glance, her freedom and her new, wealthy life her only concern. My house, once filled with light and noise, was now a tomb of quiet sorrow. I watched my son retreat into a shell, and I held my grandson as he cried for a mother who had so callously rejected him. The wound was deep, and I feared it might never heal. But life, in its strange and stubborn way, began to push through the cracks of our despair. It started with a woman named Sasha. I had hired a private investigator to find her, based on the name from the license. I needed to understand the full scope of the deception. I found her not in a penthouse, but in a modest apartment across town. She was Sloane's identical twin sister, separated at birth and adopted by different families. Sloane had sought her out years ago, not for sisterly love, but as a tool. She had paid Sasha, who was struggling to make ends meet as a freelance graphic designer, to impersonate her for short periods, to be the Sloane at home when the real Sloane was with Alistair, or on a flight to Milan. The differences in handwriting, demeanor, even-handedness, it all made a horrifying sense. Sasha was the sweet, patient one. Sloane was the cold, ambitious one. Sasha was riddled with guilt. She had needed the money desperately, and Sloane had preyed on that, manipulating her with half-truths and promises. When I confronted her, she broke down, sobbing, apologizing over and over for her part in the charade. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she cried. I needed to pay my rent. She said it was just to cover for her while she ran errands, that it was harmless." I looked at this woman, who shared the face of the woman who had shattered my family, but whose eyes held a genuine remorse and a gentle spirit. And a crazy, impossible idea began to form in my mind. I started inviting Sasha over. At first it was just for coffee. Then she started coming around when Jake was home. He was, understandably, confused and wary. But Sasha was different. She was patient. She listened. She didn't try to force herself on him. She would draw with him, her artistic talent captivating him. She remembered the song about the moon that the nice mom had sung to him. Slowly, tentatively, a bond began to form. I saw David watching them, a complex mix of pain and curiosity in his eyes. He saw the face he had loved, but attached to a soul that was kind, honest, and deeply apologetic for the pain her twin had caused. One evening, about 6 months after Sloane had left, I found David and Sasha talking quietly on the porch. He was smiling, a real, genuine smile I hadn't seen in so long. My heart gave a tentative, hopeful flutter. Their relationship didn't blossom overnight. It was a slow, careful dance of healing. David had to separate the woman Sasha was from the ghost of her sister. Sasha had to forgive herself for her role in our pain. But love, it turns out, can grow in the most unlikely soil. 2 years after that terrible family dinner, I stood in our backyard, under a canopy strung with fairy lights. David stood at the front, his eyes fixed on Sasha as she walked toward him, not in a grand gown, but in a simple, elegant dress the color of champagne. Jake, now 10, stood beside his father as his best man, beaming. Leo was there, his arm around me, his smile proud and relieved. "You did this, Mom," he whispered. "You saved us." I looked at my family, at David, his eyes full of love and a hard-won peace, at Sasha, who had not just married my son, but had truly become Jake's mother in every way that mattered, at Leo, my brave sky-gazer. The wounds were now scars, reminders of our survival, not our suffering. The truth had been a devastating storm, but it had washed our world clean. It had taken away a lie and given us a second chance at a genuine, joyful life. We had faced the darkness and found our way back to the light, stronger and more whole than we had ever been before. If you've ever had your world turned upside down by a secret, you know how important it is to find your truth. Your own story matters. If you feel comfortable, share your experience in the comments below. Your words might be the light that guides someone else through their own darkness. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories of courage and renewal to come, and I'd be honored to have you with me for the next one.